Welcome to the Darkstream. Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and unauthorized.tv. Welcome to the unauthorized, to the reprehensibles, to the Dread Ilk, the VFM, and, as always, the Bears. So I talked to Owen tonight, and it was fun because he is definitely pumped up for this tour. He is definitely fired up for it. And we'll see how it goes. You know, I have the feeling that in some ways it's almost going to be more of a celebration and a revival than a conventional comedy show. But we'll see. You know, I'm looking forward to seeing the special just like anyone else. Welcome, Drywall Bear. And it's very pertinent, given the topic that just came up. I linked to it on the blog today. And there's an old Gamergate meme, which is from an old video game. And I repurposed it a little bit in light of this Hollywood Reporter article I read. All your comedy are belong to us. And what we're seeing is that the SJWs, the social justice left, in taking over the mainstream media, is abandoning the field to people who don't go along with the narrative. They're creating comic books that nobody wants to read. They're creating movies that nobody wants to see. Just today, it was announced that Kevin Feige, who is the president of the Marvel movies, is now being saddled with the responsibility for making Star Wars movies, because the people making Star Wars movies screwed it up so badly that the interest in Star Wars, as measured by Google Trends, is at the lowest point in 16 years. And in comedy, the situation is really dire. I watched Bill Burr's recent special. It's called Paper Tiger. And Bill Burr was probably my favorite American comedian of the last 5 years or so. And he was not bad. You know, he wasn't atrocious. There was definitely a moderate amount of humor in what he was presenting. And he wasn't a complete coward. He wasn't a complete cuck. You know, he wasn't the same fearless guy who was talking about an epidemic of gold-digging whores. And he did stand up a little bit to feminists. But it was all because he was piling on the white feminists. Now, obviously, some of you who are familiar with Bill Burr understand that he has some of what we call identity complications, and of course you expect that to have an impact on things. But, you know, if old Bill Burr was an 8 or a 9 on the comedy scale, this show was a 5 with occasional ebbs to 4. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't awful, but it was nowhere near as good as it used to be. Uh, David Chappelle's big Netflix special. It wasn't bad, and it was interesting that he was willing to push back a little bit against the SJW narrative. But when he wasn't stealing jokes from Owen, he was not hitting very many fastballs. You know, if the old Chappelle was a 10, his show was maybe a 6. I would say it was a 6. And that's the best they have to offer now. That's the best they have to offer because comedy is rooted in uncomfortable truths. Comedy is something that requires a modicum of truth, and that's something that is not compatible with social justice. You know, I write about this in SJWs Always Lie, and I talk about the fact that the fully converged institution, the fully converged individual, is totally incapable, fundamentally and intrinsically incapable of performing their function. Now, I don't think that Chappelle and Bill Burr are gatekeepers in the Joe Rogan sense. I don't think that they're gatekeepers in the Steven Crowder sense. But I do think that they mark the outer limits of what the mainstream is permitted to be authorized. And it's really interesting to read this article. You can find the link to it on my blog because they talk about this somebody who's doing something actually because he violated the narrative and the news was greeted with high fives in much of the comedy community. Remember, this is supposedly the community that reveres Lenny Bruce. You know, and it's clearly changed completely. Now, obviously, when we take over, we can crush them, and anyone who takes the name of the Lord in vain or uses vulgarity, we can disemploy. And we'll expect that news to be greeted with high fives in much of the comedy community. Anyhow, it said, but not all comedians were rejoicing. And they talked about, actually, to Bill Burr's credit, they said he snarled, "None of them cares. All they want to do is get people in trouble." He's right. He's absolutely right. If the pro-Gillis faction has a rebel base, it would be Gas Digital, a subscription streaming network that charges $8.50 a month based in New York's East Village and catering to alt-right sensibilities or what others see as envelope-pushing anything-goes comedy in the vein of Lenny Bruce or Sam Kinison. Now, I think that's an interesting context that they create because what they're saying is comedy is either authorized and woke or it is alt-right. And this is exactly why I have said on numerous occasions the alt-right is inevitable. Because anytime you completely remove the ability of an organization or an individual to perform their function, it will be replaced. And so, now obviously Gas Digital is they're not, exactly like Unauthorized. Unauthorized is not focused on comedy. Gas Digital is. But I thought it was very interesting that they've gone to the same subscription model that we have. Why? Because the advertising model is dead. Even the Chive, which is a very popular internet site, basically talks about video games and puts up pictures of hot chicks with not too many clothes on. They have abandoned the advertising model. Their founders actually said the advertising model is broken. It no longer works. We have to go to a subscription model. And what's interesting about a subscription model is that it's very difficult to go along with the narrative if it's at the expense of your base, because your base is the only thing keeping you alive. You have to put your base first and front and center if you want to continue to exist. That's why we listen to you guys. Those of you who have the green letters and the various symbols and everything, I pay more attention to you guys than I do to the others. Why? Because you make this possible. Same with unauthorized. When we talk about possible changes, different things that we can do, etc., our first thought is, what are the unauthorized subscribers going to think about this? Is this something that is going to increase and it's probably dangerous for me to say this, given how I usually utilize it sarcastically in a very different context, but we are actually looking to enhance your enjoyment and your commitment to the channel. And so when you get away from that, when you start thinking like the NFL does, well, what about the casual women viewers? What about the foreign viewers? What about the Spanish language viewers? If like NASCAR, you start thinking about, well, what about people outside the South? Then you lose your connection with the subscribers. You lose your connection with your core audience. You lose your connection with your base. And that way lies madness, declining subscriber bases, and eventual failure. It's not the only reason for failure. Technologies change. People lose their fastball. Welcome, Jeff Godley. I did get too close to that. Where were you, Bear? Says, please don't say enhance user experience or I'll have to unsub. I totally agree. I stopped myself as soon as I said enhance, and I thought, okay, I can't say enhance the user experience. Speaking of language, it was funny. I was having lunch with a friend today, and we actually found the best pizzeria that I've been to since we were at this little place down in Buffalo mozzarella country, about an hour south of Napoli. And it's phenomenal. It was I had this pizza caprese, which is, it's basically like a caprese salad, only a pizza. But I got a little crazy, and I asked the guy if I could also have some ricotta on it. And he kind of looked at me a little bit suspiciously, but then he said, sure, no problem. And then he came back and said, do you want tomatoes, or do you want cherry tomatoes? And I said, pomodorini, cherry tomatoes. And so he approved. He gave me a thumbs up, and it's like, okay, so you like things a little bit different than the norm, but you're still operating within the approved cucina italiana style. So I was sharing this with the guy. I was explaining this to the guy that I was having lunch with, who he speaks great French, so he speaks a little bit of Italian, but not much. And I was saying, well, you have to understand the Italians are very serious about this stuff. And I told him the time when I ordered a cappuccino after lunch, and the chef actually came out of the kitchen because he had to see this madman who was so reckless with his digestion. And so, and then when he discovered I was an American, he was like, "Oh, okay, Americans, they're all crazy and careless." But it was really funny because I don't know that he really believed me. So after we'd finished our pizzas, which, as I mentioned, were phenomenal. I mean, this was a tiny place. We counted it literally had 15 chairs. It only fits 15 people, and it's fantastic. But anyhow, my friend says, or the guy comes over and he's explaining, he brings out the limoncello and he asks, "Does anyone want coffee?" And so my friend kind of shoots me a mischievous look and says, "Can I have a cappuccino, please?" The guy just looks at him and says, "No." Just flat out, "No, you can't have a cappuccino." No, Smart Alec Productions, you didn't understand. Espresso is absolutely fine, but you can't have milk. Apparently, drinking milk after 10 a.m. is bad for your digestion, which is why you can't have cappuccinos after 10 a.m. I shudder. I shudder to think what they would think of the cappuccino that I just had at well after midnight. So, so we did have espresso, but it was pretty funny. He was just like, "I didn't really believe you." I said, I don't lie about these things. Why would I lie about this?" He's like, "Well, you're a storyteller." I said, "Like rhetoric, the best stories are based in truth." So, anyhow, just that mention of language made me think about lunch today. I mean, this pizza was so good that I was seriously thinking about going back there for dinner. It was crazy. So anyhow, I haven't done any of the super chats yet, Jack. Be patient, please. But yeah, so it's good. But back to comedy. I am not exaggerating. After spending the time that I've spent talking with Owen and working with him and beginning to understand the mechanics of comedy, I genuinely think that I could do a better 1 hour comedy special than Amy Schumer, or probably than 50% of the professional comedians in Hollywood. Not because I'm funny, not because I have any desire whatsoever to do stand-up, appear in front of crowds. I mean, I have been turning down speaking engagements for something, since 2001. So I don't do stand-up. I don't do speeches. I don't do this stuff. But I honestly think that I could do it better than most of them because they violate the fundamental rules. They actually still apply a lot of the, call them structural aspects. They still construct the jokes, but there's no base there. There's nothing there. There's no there because it's not based on truth, and it's just the same damn thing over and over. You know that guy? He's stupid. They've been telling the same jokes about Donald Trump, George Bush, Ronald Reagan and Gerald Ford, as long as I can remember. They're the same jokes. And they're not funny. they were barely funny when Chevy Chase was doing his Gerald Ford impersonation. Barely. I mean, to say that they've been beaten into the ground doesn't even begin to describe it. And they can't poke fun at anything because it's all defined as offensive. You know, what are they supposed to attack? So all they can do is do a variant on the, you know, that guy, he's so stupid. And then now they do the, you know, those white men, they're so racist. It's just absolutely non-comedic. You know, the convergence of comedy is excising all of the actual humor out of it. So we have non-comedic comedy. It's absolutely hopeless. That's interesting. Patricia says Simon Evans made an interesting program on the nature of left-wing comedy. Simon Evans is actually very funny. I think he's probably my favorite English stand-up comic, or at least he was. So, and so it's interesting to see how most of the professional comedians today are embracing the surgical excise of humor from their profession. You know, this is not going to function. This is not going to last. The laughs are not real. They're polite. You know, when you watch a mainstream comedy special now, it's actually a little bit uncomfortable to watch people bombing so reliably. They people laugh, and keep in mind, they're often performing against people who have been drinking, and they get the exact same kind of mildly uncomfortable, polite laughs that a boomer pastor gets in church. It's ludicrous. It's pathetic. Mark Pearson has a good point. Comedians used to be thinkers, now they are actors. Yeah, it's... Chris said he pictured me showing up in the crowd and heckling Owen. That would actually be kind of funny. But you know, it's going to be, yeah, applause, not laughs. Exactly. And so, you know, this is literally the death of professional comedy. Social justice convergence is the death of professional comedy in much the same way that convergence is the death of movies or comic books. You know, I've just written a book that addresses this. And I mean, I didn't even address comedy because comedy is, you know, very far outside my wheelhouse. But I addressed movies, I addressed sports, I addressed comic books, and so forth. And the process is exactly the same. Open for Owen and blackface. That would be funny. No, I'm too polite and elitist to ever do that. It's not about the PC. It's just about it being fundamentally gauche. Redox Bear says most movies and shows nowadays are unwatchable trash. Yeah, it's almost embarrassing. Like, for example, Andy Sandberg, I think is his name. Welcome, St. George Bear. He has got to be the least funny so-called comedian I have ever seen. You know, there were all these ads for Brooklyn Nine-Nine, whatever. And Space Bunny and I turned it on for maybe 90 seconds tops. It was so bad. I mean, it wasn't just horrifically not funny. It was so relentlessly stupid. Even, I mean, we only watched it for about 90 seconds and it was still relentlessly stupid was the correct description of it. It was the kind of, it seemed like it was humor designed to appeal to people with 75 to 80 IQs, would be my estimate. It was just, moronic is about the most positive thing you can say about it. You know, maybe people who are actual morons might smile and laugh at it. Logos Arto says, how do I stop my girlfriend, future wife, watching trash on TV? Leave her to it and introduce her to better stuff. You know, people have the taste that they have. You know, so and they have the right to that. You know, don't be dissing it. Don't be making snide comments. That's just annoying. You know, but go ahead and introduce them to something that is better. You know, no, I don't think you should get rid of the TV because, you know, it's not, your life together is not just about you. But look for activities and look for things that are more intellectually engaging. You know. So let's atrophying the amygdala, yeah. No. Vox is not going to become a stand-up comic. You know, it's just we all have things that we want to do. We all have things that we hope to achieve. That has never ever been on my list, I assure you. So, but my point is simply that the mainstream comedy industry has become so converged that even a complete amateur who understands the basic structures of comedy could come out and present a show that would be funnier than the average professional comedian today. Hudson says, what would you say to people who want to be actors but hate the films today? Just do theater or something? I think that you should work on creating your own little films. The cameras that you have today are better than anything that the professionals used to have. You know, create something new. If you're aware enough and intelligent enough to hate what's being done, then you should be able to do better, even if you're not particularly good at it. OKC Bear is correct. Mainstream comedy isn't even comedic. And that's why I said it. This is post-humor comedy. It's post-comedic comedy. Actually, no, a funnier term would be post-humorous comedy. So, all right, let's do some super chats here. Oh, and then I had a couple other things. We're going to try, speaking of comedy and so forth, we're going to revive the Daily Meme Wars. Here's one that somebody sent me that we'll probably use soon. I want an Oompa Loompa now. I'm sorry. Just her faces. Her face, the Gretard's face, is funnier than 85.6% of professional comedy today. It seriously is. Okay. Anthony Sterniolo sent $20. Thank you, Anthony, if you're here. Greiber to unauthorized. But we're going to be having a crowdfunding campaign that we'll be supporting soon for the Castelia Junior Classics. And so when that campaign gets announced, then that's a great way to support us. M. Bolster, thank you. Dr. Azume, apparently we might need to have the rogue stage an intervention here. Dr. Azume says, thanks for your clear writing style for getting dialectical information across. Helps a bunch to follow the logic. Do you have a formula how you structure information during writing, talking? No, not really. I pretty much write how I think. I mean, ironically, I write faster than I talk. I've actually tried doing dictation. We were working very early on back in 1996 with a lot of speech recognition stuff. I tried using it then. I tried using it much more recently when it had improved, and my problem is that I can't dictate. I'd read about how Winston Churchill was very productive because of the dictation. I am definitely not Winston Churchill. It's actually faster for me to write. He says, or is it passed quickly and filtered in real time due to IQ? Well, I don't know if it's due to IQ or not, but that's how I work. I just go. I mean, it might surprise some people, but A Throne of Bones, which is 950 pages, was written without an outline. I just made it up as I went along. A Sea of Skulls, which I'm working on now, is the same way. I don't do outlines. I don't really do formal structure. I just sort of keep track of it in my head, more or less. Well, actually, not more or less. I just keep track of it all in my head, and hopefully everything makes sense. Dr. Zume then says, when starting new projects, how do you tap into available human talent and resources? Well, I have a small group of trusted lieutenants, for a lack of a better word. Owen would call them my bravos. And I start by bouncing the ideas off of them. One of them invariably explains that it will never work, it'll be a distraction, and might actually trigger the apocalypse. There are others who are at least slightly less negative. And at least 50% of the time, they succeed in convincing me that what I am thinking about is impractical, poor timing, fundamentally incorrect. Today I was talking to somebody who is the market leader in their industry, and he was explaining to me that if it were possible to do what I wanted to do, it would be a multi-billion-dollar idea, but he did not believe that it was actually possible. So we're going to continue the conversation to see if maybe if what I want isn't possible, but maybe we can move partway in that direction, right? You have to understand, we're kind of infamous with some of our partners because we're constantly coming up with new ways to do things that they're not set up for. So, like for example, the fulfillment of the Alt Hero omnibuses is actually a repurposing of a system used to send out medical journals. So, you just have to tap into what you got, and if you don't have the money for it, you don't do it. And that's why crowdfunding is so brilliant, because it allows us to find out whether there's a genuine market or not for something. You know, you can have a pretty good idea about how things are going to go. By the way, speaking of those things, you know, I was surprised, for example, I mean, and again, this is just a illustration, not a complaint. I was very surprised that we didn't do particularly well on the sales of the the various merchandise related to the tour, in light of how far afield people were going in order to go to the shows. I mean, it was fine. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it was, you know, we sold a number of the tour support shirts, and you know, we sold a number of, but we sold a lot fewer specials and documentaries than we would have if they weren't going to be, you know, broadcast on unauthorized, obviously. But and by the way, the reason I'm showing this shirt is we will stop selling these when the tour begins, which I believe on Saturday. Yeah. So these shirts are only going to be available for 2 more days. So if you haven't supported the tour yet, this is the time to do it, and then we will we'll end it. You know, we're not going to constantly be beating people over the head with, you know, buy this, buy this, buy that. You know, it's we created it for a purpose. You know, you'll be able to buy Owen Benjamin shirts for much less at Crypto Fashion. The whole point of this is supporting the tour. How are, as I saw this question, how are the how are the new, Horatio says, how are the new memberships going? How close to the doubling of membership goal by the end of the year is unauthorized so BB can get his comedy show? Well, I will check. Now, just so you understand, this month it's really slowed down because people are supporting the tour, and because last month was huge. So, you know, there's a very clear pattern. When we have a really big month, it's usually followed by a relatively flat month. Let's see. We are currently at 6.56% of the goal for the new subscriptions for a show. So, I don't think that we'll make it by the end of the year, but I think that we'll extend the deadline. So, I mean, the deadline doesn't really matter per se, but we'll see. But anyhow, we're at about 6.6%. So if we purchase the package of the DVDs and the shirt, do we get the shirt when we get the DVDs? Yes, that's why none of the shirts have been sent out yet, because we're going to do it all more or less at once. And obviously the DVDs haven't been printed yet because we haven't recorded the specials and so forth. The documentary is they just started working on that today. They may actually be working on it right now. How is the Rebel figurine coming? We've found the place we want to do it, and we're trying to sort out what pose we want. I've got 3 of our best artists drawing illustrations, and I'll let everybody who's getting a figurine vote on it. If it's close. If it's obvious, we'll just go with the one. Yeah, speaking of shirts and so forth, I just got this in the mail today, which is kind of cool. And so, you know, one step at a time. One step at a time. If Unauthorized had a chat room, we'd probably be there. Yeah, we're going to get there eventually, but you need to keep in mind is that growth has to be done carefully. You know, we're now at the point where our level of bandwidth is no longer free. And so you don't want to be trying to recreate YouTube's experience of losing massive quantities of money because you have lots and lots of views. So, keep that in mind when you're saying, oh, you should do this, you should do that. Let's see what you were interested in with the additional sensitivity, if there happens to be any psychological scars from that sort of thing. But I don't know you, I don't know her, so I'm just going to warn you right now that there are no shortage of young women who claim to have been raped who weren't. I'm not asking you, you don't need to assure me that she's telling the truth. I don't care at all. I'm just letting you know. So, Marie wants to know, is it possible that Peterson faked this whole thing to sell books at an upcoming Politicon October 26th? No, I don't think so. He doesn't need help selling books. I don't think so. Elfin says, is it racist to be a Dark Lord supremacist? No, of course not. Obviously, Dark Lords are supreme. I mean, that's like by definition. Also, I just read Plato's Apology and want to know if Christ had risen in the time of Socrates, do you think he would be a Christian faithful? No, not at all. Socrates was a servant of the lie. He was a very clever snake. Read my take on Euthyphro if you want to understand why I think Socrates is a snake. And let's not even get into the fundamental evil of the cave, the Republic, etc., etc. Now, maybe we don't actually blame Socrates, maybe we blame Plato for that, but regardless, Plato was Socrates' student, and if the consequences are poor, the teacher is probably teaching bad lessons. Wrangler Star says 20. Okay. Thomas W. says, what should a country that has a trade surplus have their trade policy be? More tariffs or less? If they have a trade surplus, then they want to continue that. So they basically want to, they're winning the free trade. They're winning free trade. So they probably want to have less tariffs because they want to convince the countries that are losing to them to continue losing to them. That's why China wants free trade. That's why China wants to get out of this trade war, because the trade deficit means that the US can only win by erecting tariffs, and that comes at China's expense. William Smith says, what can more young people do to prepare for our future? Read, learn, seek wisdom, support the good, the right, the true, and the beautiful, and pray. Also, focus on getting married and having children, not on collecting credentials and selling out for lollipops and fancy pants. It's no secret. The future belongs to those who show up for it. So show up for it. What's your favorite historical period and why? I like to read, probably pre-World War I England. That kind of strikes me as the, at least for the middle classes and up, that strikes me as sort of the pinnacle of civilization. It's really interesting. I was reading a book just today. I don't even know the name of it. It's Arturo Perez Reverte's new one, What We Become. And it's his first, I've read a lot of his books, and in my experience, it's his first literary book. And it's very clear that Europe before World War One was essentially the peak of civilization. The sense of loss that his characters convey is something that I've run across again and again and again from historians and novelists alike. You know, I'm also, for whatever reason, uh, mildly fascinated with Heian Japan because it's the most aesthetic society that I've ever come across. Hermit Bear says, please remind us of your bit that goes something like knowledge is size of weapon, wisdom is knowing where to aim, etc. Okay. Um, it's not, no. IQ is the size of the cannon. You know, the caliber, the bore, whatever you want to call it. And experience and knowledge are the ammunition, whereas wisdom is knowing where to aim it. The smarter you are, the bigger gun you've got. But that doesn't mean that you've got anything to shoot, and that doesn't mean that you know where to shoot it. You need knowledge and experience in order to make use of it, and then of course you need to be wise enough to know where you should be firing those shots. Sir Fender Jazzmaster says, respectfully disagree about Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Could it be white versus blue collar humor? No. I have, it completely mystifies me that anyone would ever find that funny, but you know, you're welcome to it. I'm not telling you can't or you shouldn't, you know, feel free. All I ask is that you don't make me watch it or eliminate all other comedy except for that. I would object to that too. Marie Golay said, will someone meme Joe Biden sniffing Greta's hair? That would be a pretty good one, actually. I like that idea. Circus Bear said, you are awesome. Thank you for all you've taught me. You're very welcome. The social hierarchy helped me understand myself better. It's made a big impact on in my marriage. That's good. I'm glad to hear that. Hopefully positive. I would assume so based on that. And then Horatius, we already talked about the new memberships. When I send a super chat, your stream freezes. Okay, so don't. My fiance says sees Jordan Peterson as a father figure and an intellectual. I have pointed out why he is the exact opposite, yet she remains stubborn. Do you have any advice? Yes, stop trying to convince her. You've already pointed out the truth. She doesn't want to give in. There's lots of women who instinctively say no to everything. And then they just kind of quietly go along with it, change their mind, until one day you're tempted to say, wait a minute, don't you disagree with that? But you can't. I mean, you need to understand the way that women work. Women almost never say, you're right, I was wrong. Now I am changing my mind and I agree with you. Don't ever expect to hear that. Just stick to your guns. Don't bring it up. When she brings it up, then you can say, well, you know, I think he's a drug addicted occultist who has lots of dark secrets, and I think it's crazy for anyone to listen to him. Also, if you look at his children, he looks like a terrible father. You know, when you're asked, share your opinion. When an opinion is thrust in your face, feel free to disagree with it. Otherwise, you've made your point clear. She knows. And frankly, I fully expect that she'll come around in time. Just let her come around in her own time. Dr. Azumi has a good point. Then stop sending super chats. Yeah, it's like the old joke. It hurts when I do this, so stop doing it. Greta was trying to steal Big Bear's bid on the boomer. How dare you? How dare you, Greta? Yeah. I mean, if you want to try using dialectic, which probably won't work, just read his bit on how he handled other children attacking his children. He's many things, but a good father figure, not so much one of them. Rebecca Rojas says, I want to thank you and Dr. Brown for the medieval history on Unauthorized. I think I love it as much as Peterson loves meth. Well, perhaps we'll have to arrange rehab. Hermit Bear said he already posted the meme of Biden sniffing Greta's hair on his Twitter. That's good. All right. Let's see. All right, that pretty much covers it. Just trying to think if there's anything else that we need to address immediately. Well, you know, you need to keep in mind, somebody said, didn't Owen say he was going to break the next person's nose? This, how dare you to him? Oh, yeah, I misunderstood the context. I thought he was getting tired of having his own jokes told to him. So, Pike says Biden lost his wife and daughter in a car accident, could have messed him up. Could be that, or just could be that traumatic encounter with corn pop. You know, I mean, facing down a hardened gangbanger like Corn Pop and his bad dudes that he ran, you know, I mean, that leaves its mark. You know, I think that there's probably a little post-traumatic stress disorder there. So, anyhow, if you're going to Owen's show, have a great time. Hope it goes well, and look forward to hearing how it went. Remember, you've got 2 days left if you want to pick up a official tour short, or the DVDs will still be available, but the shirts will not be. You can get them at arkhavencomics.com. And on that note, I will bid you a good night. Have a good evening. This is the Darkstream. I'm Vox Day.